The metal corridors of the alien research station hummed with a low, woo, endless sound, a mix of machinery and quiet voices in languages Ethan could not understand. He walked with his small toolkit clinking at his side, boots tapping against the floor as he followed the glowing signs toward Labs Sector 7. It was his first week on this job, and most of his duties were simple: tighten a valve, replace a filter, clean up dust from vents. He had been told to stay away from the restricted labs unless ordered otherwise. But today, his supervisor had given him a rare access code. The air filtration system in one of the high-security rooms had gone down, and Ethan was the only available maintenance worker at the moment. When he arrived at the door, two tall alien guards stood there, their armor a dull bronze color that caught the light in strange ways. They looked at him without expression, their black eyes unblinking. One scanned his ID, while the other opened the door with a slow hiss. "Do not speak to the subject," one of them said in broken human language, his tone like stone grinding. Ethan nodded, unsure who or what they meant by subject. Inside, the lab was cold and bright, all clean metal walls and glowing panels. At the center, behind a curved glass enclosure, sat a girl. She wasn't human, but she looked closer to human than any alien Ethan had seen before. Her skin was pale with a faint shimmer, as if moonlight lived beneath it, and her hair was silver, falling like silk down her shoulders. Her eyes were large, almost luminous, and fixed on him the moment he entered. Ethan tried not to stare. Reminding himself he was just here to fix the filter, he moved to the control panel, opened the casing, and began checking the wiring. Every so often, he felt her gaze following his hands, as if she were studying every small movement. It was strange. Most aliens he had met ignored him completely, but this one seemed curious. The silence between them felt heavy, filled only by the faint hum of the station and the soft sound of her breathing through the glass. When he reached for the top of the unit, the old metal casing slipped slightly, and he had to lean close to tighten it. As he did, a faint rush of air escaped from the damaged filter, carrying a trace of his scent into the enclosure. The girl's eyes widened instantly, her pupils narrowing, her body stiffened, and her hands gripped the edge of her seat. Ethan noticed, but thought maybe she was just startled. Inside the control room above, two alien scientists watching the monitors froze. One leaned closer to the readings, his voice sharp in his own language. The data showed an immediate spike in the girl's heart rate, temperature, and neural activity. "Impossible," one whispered. "It's the human scent." Ethan kept working, unaware of the sudden tension, but behind the glass, the girl's breathing quickened. A faint glow began to spread along the sides of her neck, forming strange, delicate patterns like silver fire. Her eyes locked onto his face with an intensity that made him pause. It wasn't anger, more like something deep and primal had awakened. The scientists whispered rapidly, their words tight with urgency. They knew this reaction. It was the first sign of the heat phase, a rare and dangerous biological state in her species. Normally, it was triggered only by contact with a chosen mate of her own kind. But here, now, it had been set off by nothing more than the accidental breath of a human man. Ethan closed the panel and stepped back. Wiping his hands, he gave her a small, polite nod, but she didn't move. Her gaze was fixed on him as if she were trying to memorize every detail of his face. Something about her expression made him uneasy, like she was feeling something far stronger than simple curiosity. The intercom clicked, and a voice told him his work was done. He packed up his tools and headed for the door. But as he reached it, he heard a sound, a single word spoken in a language he didn't know. The girl had leaned forward, her lips barely moving as she whispered it. Ethan glanced at the guards, but they didn't react. Only the scientists above looked pale. They recognized that word, and they knew exactly what it meant. It was a name not for him as a person, but for something far older in her people's history. The name for the one she was now bound to. Ethan stepped into the hallway, the door hissing shut behind him. He didn't see the way she stayed pressed to the glass, watching until he disappeared from view, nor did he hear the quiet, urgent conversation beginning in the lab above. The accident had happened, and nothing would be the same again. Ethan tried to forget about this strange moment in the lab. He told himself it was nothing, just the alien girl being curious. But as the days passed, he noticed something strange. Every time he walked through the station's corridors near the restricted section, he felt a pair of eyes watching him. Sometimes, when the hallway was quiet, he thought he could almost hear the faintest sound of breathing that matched his steps. Lyra, that was the name he learned from overheard conversations, had become restless in her enclosure. The scientists were careful to keep her under observation, but their reports were changing. Instead of sitting quietly, she now paced, eyes always scanning for the sound of approaching footsteps. And when Ethan's footsteps came, her movements stopped completely. She would stand still, facing the door, as if waiting for him to appear. The guards began to notice too. They muttered in their own language, glancing at Ethan whenever he passed. Some of them gave him sharp, suspicious looks. One day, while he was walking by, he caught a few words in broken human speech from one of the guards. Danger. Human smell. Not good. The alien muttered under his breath. Ethan didn't understand why they thought his scent was a problem. He had no idea about her species biology or the ancient traditions tied to it, but the scientists knew. In their private meetings, they spoke in urgent tones. The heat has begun, one of them said, triggered by a human. This is unprecedented. Another replied, if we separate them, she may weaken. If we let them stay near, the bond will grow. Meanwhile, Lyra's body was changing. Her temperature stayed higher than normal, her skin sometimes glowing faintly along the neck and collar. Her eyes, once calm, now seemed brighter, almost shimmering. Whenever she looked at Ethan when he came near, the readings on the monitors spiked heart rate, neural activity, hormone levels. It was as if her entire body recognized him as something necessary. One evening, Ethan was called to repair a damaged lighting system inside the observation room. The guards hesitated before letting him in, but orders were orders. As soon as the door opened, Lyra turned sharply toward him, her posture relaxed, but her eyes, they were locked onto him like he was the only thing in the room. Ethan swallowed, trying to ignore the intensity of her stare, and went about his work. While fixing a loose panel on the ceiling, his hand slipped, and he dropped a small tool. It rolled toward her glass wall, stopping right at her feet. Lyra knelt down, picked it up slowly, and held it against the glass as if offering it to him when he reached to take it. Their hands met through the transparent barrier. For a second, something strange passed between them, like a pulse of warmth that traveled from his fingertips up his arm. Lyra's eyes widened, and she inhaled sharply, pressing her palm against the glass where his hand had been. Later that night, the scientists reviewed the recordings. "This is escalating," one said quietly. "We must decide soon whether to allow it to continue." Another shook his head. "If we interrupt it now, she may not survive the withdrawal." The next day, Ethan was ordered to escort Lyra to another section of the lab. It was the first time he had seen her outside the glass enclosure. Her movements were graceful but tense, and she stayed unusually close to him as they walked. Once, her fingers brushed against his hand, and she stumbled slightly. Breathing heavier, he looked at her with concern. "You okay?" he asked softly. She gave no answer in words, only a long, lingering look that made his chest tighten. After she was placed in the new room, Ethan turned to leave, but before the guards closed the door, he heard her speak, not in alien language this time, but in halting, broken human words. "Then," she said, almost like she was tasting the sound of his name for the first time. He froze, surprised she even knew it. The guards pushed him out. But the sound of her voice stayed in his head long after. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the way she had looked at him. The way his name had sounded from her lips. Something was happening, and it wasn't just curiosity anymore. Some part of him wanted to know why, and another part was afraid of the answer. In the control room above the labs, the scientists were already preparing their next move. If the bond continued to grow, there would be no turning back. And they all knew, for both the human and the alien girl, life would never be the same again. Rumors spread fast on the station. It started with whispers among the guards, then moved to the cleaning crews, then to the engineers in the lower decks. Everyone had heard about the strange alien girl in Lab Sector 7 and how she reacted. Only to the human maintenance worker, Ethan, some called it dangerous. Others called it unnatural. A few even muttered old alien legends about bonds that crossed species and changed the fate of entire worlds. Ethan didn't care much for gossip, but he noticed the stares when he walked into the cafeteria. Conversations would slow down. Some aliens looked at him with open suspicion, their eyes narrowing. Others studied him like he was some rare animal. In a cage, it made his skin crawl, but he said nothing. Lyra's behavior only made things worse. Every time Ethan was near, she became calmer when he was gone. The scientists recorded increased restlessness and stress once. During his 3-day absence while he worked on another part of the station, Lyra had refused food for nearly an entire day. The moment he returned, she ate again without hesitation. Some of the alien staff saw this as proof of the bond. A few were curious and wanted to study it. But others, especially the higher-ranking officers, saw it as a threat. They believed such a connection between species could cause political chaos, especially if Lyra's origins were what some suspected. One afternoon, Ethan was repairing a control panel in the corridor outside her room when 2 alien guards approached. One spoke in rough human words. "You. Stay away from her." Ethan frowned. Why? The guard's black eyes glinted. Not safe. For her or for you. Without explaining further, they turned and left. Their heavy boots echoing down the hallway. Inside the observation chamber, Lyra had been watching. Her hands curled into fists, a low sound escaping her throat. Not a growl exactly, but close. She pressed her palm to the glass and tapped it twice. Ethan glanced over and, after making sure no one was watching, gave a small nod. Her tense shoulders relaxed slightly, but her gaze never left him that evening. Ethan tried to keep his distance to avoid trouble, but in the middle of the night, his communicator buzzed with an urgent call. It was one of the scientists from the lab speaking quickly. "You must come now," the voice said. "She's asking for you." When Ethan arrived, he found Lyra sitting on the floor of her enclosure. Her breathing shallow, she looked weaker, paler, and her usually glowing eyes were dull. The scientist explained in hushed tones that she had been refusing water for hours. They had tried to calm her, but nothing worked until she asked for Ethan by name. Ethan hesitated, feeling every eye in the room on him. Finally, he stepped forward and knelt near the glass. "Lyra," he said softly. Her head lifted slowly, and the moment she saw him, a spark lit in her eyes. She moved closer. Placing both hands against the glass, Ethan did the same, and as their palms met through the barrier, the monitors beeped rapidly, her pulse and temperature returning to normal. The watching scientists exchanged glances. One whispered, "It's confirmed." "Complete dependency is forming," another muttered. "We have to stop this before it's too late." But for Lyra, there was no too late. From that night on, whenever Ethan was gone for more than a few hours, her symptoms returned. The staff tried to hide it, but the pattern was clear to everyone. Some of the guards started muttering that she was dangerous now, unpredictable and obsessed. Others quietly said Ethan had become her lifeline. The tension finally exploded a week later. Ethan was on his way to the lab when two high-ranking alien officials intercepted him. They informed him that he was no longer permitted near Lyra without direct approval. Ethan tried to argue, saying she needed him, but they cut him off. "If she needs you, that is exactly why you must stay away," one of them said coldly. Ethan left, fists clenched, anger burning in his chest. Back in her enclosure, Lyra paced restlessly. Sensing something was wrong when Ethan didn't arrive at his usual time, she pressed against the glass. Scanning the hallway, hours passed, and her breathing grew uneven. By the time the scientists realized the danger, it was already happening, her body entering another dangerous spike in temperature. Her energy fading fast. In that moment, some of the scientists began to understand. This wasn't just some passing biological phase. This was becoming something deeper, a connection that neither human nor alien law had prepared for. And the longer they fought it, the closer they came to losing her entirely. Asterisk, the order to keep Ethan away from Lyra lasted only 2 days. 2 long, tense days where he worked in distant sectors of the station, his mind constantly drifting back to her. He told himself it was none of his business, that she wasn't even human, but the image of her pale, weak face the last time he saw her refused to leave his thoughts. By the second night, he barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her pressed against the glass, her glowing eyes dimming, her lips forming his name. In the lab, things were getting worse. Lyra had stopped eating again, and her temperature kept rising. She paced endlessly, sometimes clutching her chest. Her breaths shallow and uneven. The scientists tried everything, adjusting the environment, offering rare foods from her homeworld, even playing recordings of calming sounds. Nothing worked. She kept turning toward the door, waiting for someone who never came. Finally, one of the younger scientists broke the rules, against orders. He sent a quiet message to Ethan. "Come now," it said. "She's not going to last like this." Ethan didn't even hesitate. He grabbed his toolkit, just in case he needed an excuse, and made his way to Lab Sector 7. The guards at the door stared, but didn't stop him. Perhaps they had been ordered to. Perhaps they simply didn't want the responsibility if she worsened. When the door slid open, Lyra froze, her eyes locked onto him instantly. The tension in her body melting away as if a weight had been lifted. She stepped forward quickly, her movements unsteady but full of urgency. Ethan stopped a few steps from the glass. "Lyra," he said softly, his voice unsure. She pressed both hands against the barrier, her lips parting as if she were about to speak. For a long moment, she simply looked at him. Then, in broken human words, she whispered, "Need you." Ethan blinked, caught off guard by the raw emotion in her voice. "I'm here," he replied, though he wasn't sure what else to say. Her eyes shimmered, and she pressed her forehead to the glass. He mirrored the gesture without thinking, their breath fogging the transparent wall between them. The scientists in the observation room above exchanged glances. One of them muttered, "It's not just heat. This is emotional imprinting." Another shook his head. "It's worse than that. She's choosing him." Later that night, alarms rang through the station. Ethan, still nearby, rushed back to the lab without waiting for clearance. He found the guards shouting in their language, the scientists scrambling around the consoles. Lyra was on the floor of her enclosure, her breathing ragged, her body trembling. Without thinking, Ethan ran to the manual override and opened the door. The guards moved to stop him, but the chief scientist barked an order that froze them in place. Ethan knelt beside her, lifting her gently into his arms. She was burning hot to the touch, her skin glowing faintly, her eyes fluttered open. Focusing on him with a mix of relief and exhaustion, he held her close, whispering, "You're okay. I've got you." Slowly, her breathing began to steady, her trembling easing as she pressed her face against his chest. From above, the scientists Watched in stunned silence, the monitors showed her vitals returning to stable levels the longer Ethan held her. It was undeniable now. Physical proximity to him wasn't just comfort, it was survival as she rested in his arms. Lyra murmured something in her own language. The words were soft, almost like a song. Ethan didn't understand, but the tone made his chest tighten. He glanced up at the scientists, and to his surprise, several of them looked shocked. One whispered. She called him bondmate. The word carried a heavy meaning in her culture, a declaration usually made only once in a lifetime. Ethan didn't know what that meant, but he could feel the weight of it in her voice when she finally pulled back. Her glowing eyes stayed fixed on his. Her lips curved into the smallest, faintest smile. "Ethan," she said again, with more strength this time, as if tasting the name gave her power. The guards shifted uncomfortably, and the chief scientist stepped forward. "You need to understand," the alien said in careful human speech, "from this point. She will not survive without you." Ethan looked down at Lyra, who still hadn't let go of his sleeve. 100 questions burned in his mind. But only one truly mattered. What was he going to do now, knowing that walking away might mean her death? The station didn't sleep that night. Word of what happened in the lab spread like a spark in dry grass. By morning, everyone knew the human and the alien girl were no longer just a strange curiosity. They were connected in a way no one could deny. Some whispered that it was dangerous, others that it was fate, but for the alien authorities, it was a problem that had to be solved immediately. Ethan woke to the sound of heavy boots outside his quarters. The door slid open without warning, and 2 armored guards stepped inside. Behind them came a tall alien in dark robes, an official, his presence cold and commanding. "You will not approach the subject again," the alien said in a flat voice. "Your contact with her ends now." Ethan sat up, anger flaring. "If I don't see her, she gets sick, you've seen it yourself." The official's black eyes narrowed. "Then it is better for her to end than for this to continue." The words hit Ethan like a blow. He stood, fists clenched. "You can't just decide that." The alien tilted his head slightly. "She is valuable, yes, but not at the cost of destabilizing our laws. Or our politics." Ethan didn't understand. But he could feel there was more to Lyra's situation than anyone was telling him. Later that day, he was summoned to a private meeting with one of the scientists who had shown him kindness before. In the dimly lit maintenance corridor, the scientist spoke in a hushed tone. "She is not just any member of her species," he said. "She is important, maybe royalty, maybe something higher. No one here will tell you the whole truth." Ethan frowned, and my scent triggered this. Heat. The scientist nodded slowly, and once the bond is started, it can't be undone without destroying her. Ethan paced, his mind racing. "Then why are they trying to keep us apart?" he asked. The scientist's expression turned grim. "Because if the bond completes, you'll be connected to her for life in mind and spirit, and that will change the balance of power between her people and everyone else." That night, they tried to move Lyra. Ethan learned about it only when alarms echoed through the corridors. Rushing toward the sound, he saw guards struggling as Lyra fought them with surprising strength. Her glowing eyes were wild, her breaths rapid, her voice breaking as she called his name over and over when she caught sight of him. She broke free and ran straight to the edge of her enclosure, pressing against the glass. The chief scientist shouted for the guards to restrain her, but Ethan stepped between them. "Enough," he said, his voice low but sharp. Lyra's hands trembled against the barrier. Her eyes locked on his as if no one else existed. The guards hesitated, unsure whether to push past him. Finally, the chief scientist raised a hand, signaling them to stand down. Later, in a tense meeting, the highest-ranking alien on the station addressed Ethan directly. "You have one night to decide," the alien said. "Walk away now, and we will end this before it grows. Or accept the bond and live with its consequences." Ethan asked what those consequences were, but the alien only replied, "Once complete. You will never be free of her, and she will never be free of you." When he was escorted back to his quarters, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about her. He remembered the way her breathing had steadied when he held her, the way she had spoken his name like it was something sacred. He remembered how she had collapsed when they were apart, and the look of fear in her eyes every time someone tried to take him away. Lyra, in her room, sat quietly for the first time in hours. She knew the decision was coming, through the glass, through the walls. She imagined she could still sense him somewhere nearby. Her fingers traced patterns in the air, shapes from her people's traditions, the kind given only to a chosen bondmate. Ethan stared at the ceiling of his small room. He thought about walking away, about going back to the life he had before. But every time he imagined her alone in that cold, bright room, something inside him twisted. He didn't know what the bond truly meant. But he knew one thing: he couldn't watch her fade away, not if there was something he could do. And as the station's artificial night cycle fell, the choice became clear. When morning came, Ethan would give them his answer, one that would change both of their lives forever. Asterisk, the station's artificial morning light spilled into Ethan's small quarters. He sat on the edge of his bed, hands clasped, his mind heavy with the weight of the choice. All night he had replayed moments with Lyra, her voice calling his name, her fragile form trembling until he touched her, the glow in her eyes. When he was near, he thought about the warning, that accepting the bond meant his life would never again be his own. But every time he imagined turning his back on her, he saw her alone in that cold glass room, fading away. When the guards came to escort him to the council chamber, Ethan was calm. The highest-ranking alien waited there, flanked by scientists and officials. "You have decided," the alien said, his deep voice filling the room. Ethan met his gaze without hesitation. "I'll stay with her." A ripple of murmurs spread through the chamber, some voices sharp with anger, others surprised. The alien official's expression did not change. "Then you understand the bond must be completed. There will be no undoing it." "I understand," Ethan said firmly, though inside his chest his heart was pounding. They led him to the bonding chamber, a room unlike anything he had seen on the station. It was dim, lit only by faint blue light, with soft ripples of mist in the air. At the center was a low platform surrounded by intricate markings that glowed faintly. Lyra was already there, standing still, her silver hair catching the light. When she saw him, her eyes brightened instantly, her posture relaxing as if a tension had snapped. The chief scientist explained the process in careful human words. "It is not physical. It is a sharing of breath and heartbeat, an exchange of essence," he said. "When it is done, you will be connected in mind and feeling." Ethan glanced at Lyra, who watched him with quiet intensity. He stepped forward onto the platform, and she moved to meet him. For a moment, they simply stood facing each other, breathing in the same space. Lyra lifted her hands, touching her fingertips lightly to his chest. Her touch was warm, almost electric, sending a subtle shiver through him. Ethan raised his own hands, mirroring the gesture against her collarbone, feeling the faint, rhythmic thrum of her pulse. Her eyes closed, and she exhaled slowly. Ethan matched her breath without thinking, falling into the same steady rhythm. The air around them seemed to thicken, the mist swirling closer. Ethan felt a warmth spread from his chest, flowing through his arms and into her. At the same time, something foreign yet familiar trickled into his mind, flashes of emotion that were not his own. He felt her relief, her gratitude, her deep, aching fear of losing him, and beneath it all, a steady warmth that felt like trust. When their eyes opened again, the glow in Lyra's skin had softened to a steady, calm light. Her breathing was slow and even. Her trembling gone, Ethan felt different too. Not physically stronger, but more aware. He could sense her presence like a faint hum in the back of his mind, a connection that stretched beyond sight or touch. He realized that if she were to speak or feel something intense, he might know it without a single word. The scientists observed in silence, recording every reading. One of them finally said, "It is complete," his voice almost reverent. But not everyone in the room was pleased. Some of the officials exchanged tense looks, their eyes sharp, as if calculating what this meant for the future. Lyra stepped closer, her voice soft but clear. "Ethan." Hearing his name from her in that steady tone made something in him tighten. He smiled faintly. "I'm not going anywhere." She tilted her head slightly, studying him like she was memorizing the moment. In her culture, this was no small promise. It was a vow. When they left the chamber, the corridors felt different. Guards and crew stopped to watch them pass, whispers following in their wake. Ethan ignored them, his focus on the soft brush of Lyra's shoulder against his. For the first time since arriving on the station, he didn't feel like an outsider. He felt like someone who mattered, not just to her, but perhaps to something much larger. That night, alone in his quarters, Ethan could still sense her presence even from across the station. It was like a faint echo of her heartbeat pulsing in time with his. He lay back, staring at the ceiling, knowing there was no going back. Whatever happened next, they would face it together, and somewhere deep inside, a part of him was no longer afraid of what that might mean. In the days that followed, the bond between Ethan and Lyra became impossible to hide. Everywhere he went, he could feel her presence, like a faint warmth in the back of his mind. Sometimes he would stop mid-step, sensing a flicker of emotion. From her surprise, curiosity, or even a quiet kind of happiness. At first, it unsettled him, but soon it became something he relied on. He knew when she was safe, when she was afraid, and when she was looking for him. The station's crew watched them with mixed reactions. Some avoided them completely, as if afraid the connection might spread like a sickness. Others stared openly, whispering about how no one had seen a bond like this in living memory. A few even offered quiet nods of respect when they passed. It was clear that whatever had happened between them was more than just strange biology. It was changing the way people looked at humans and her kind. Lyra seemed different too. The restless energy that had once driven her to pace endlessly was gone. She moved with calm purpose now, often walking beside Ethan instead of staying in her enclosure. When he spoke to her, she listened intently. And when she answered in broken human words, she did so with a carefulness that made him think she was afraid of saying the wrong thing. Sometimes she didn't need words at all. A glance or a faint smile told him everything she wanted him to know. One morning, while Ethan was repairing a conduit on the outer ring of the station, he felt something strange. A sharp jolt of fear cut through his thoughts. Not his own, but hers, without hesitation. He dropped his tools and started toward her location. The closer he got, the more he could feel her unease, like a drumbeat growing faster. When he turned the corner, he saw her surrounded by two alien officers he didn't recognize. Their posture aggressive. They were speaking in her language, voices sharp. Lyra's eyes darted toward Ethan the moment she saw him, and he felt her relief flood into him through the bond. "Is there a problem?" Ethan asked, his voice calm but firm. The officers gave him a cold look. "She is being questioned about her status." One said, "She's with me," Ethan replied, stepping closer, his tone leaving no room for argument. After a long pause, the officers stepped back and left without another word. But their eyes promised this wouldn't be the last time. Later, Lyra explained in halting phrases that some of her people saw the bond as a betrayal. Ethan understood then that their connection was not only rare, it was controversial. It had the power to unite, but also the power to divide. And while he didn't fully grasp the political weight of it, He knew it made her a target, and by extension him, as well as days turned into weeks. Ethan began to notice subtle changes in himself. His senses felt sharper. He could pick out faint sounds from across a room, detect shifts in the air. His instincts were faster too, almost as if her reflexes were blending with his own. The scientists confirmed it quietly, saying the bond worked both ways. He was becoming more, just as she was stabilizing through him. But with that growth came new challenges. Messages from higher authorities began arriving, questioning why the bond had been allowed to complete. Some demanded it be broken, an impossible and deadly request. Others suggested they should be transferred off-station, somewhere they could be observed more closely. Ethan refused to be separated from her, and Lyra's reaction to even the idea was immediate. A flare of panic that he felt like a physical blow in his chest. One evening, as they stood by the large viewing window looking out at the stars, Lyra reached for his hand. Her fingers curled around his gently, her eyes glowing faintly in the reflection of the galaxy beyond. Through the bond, he felt her determination, her belief that whatever came next, they could face it together. "Not afraid," she said softly, her voice carrying more strength than he'd ever heard from her before. Ethan squeezed her hand. "Neither am I." Behind them, whispers still followed. Plots still formed in the shadows, and there were still those who wanted their connection destroyed. But for the first time since the accident that started it all, Ethan wasn't thinking about what could go wrong. He was thinking about the fact that they had each other, and that was enough. Because whatever the universe decided to throw at them, they were no longer just a human and an alien girl. They were something more, something neither side had a word for yet. And together, they were ready to find out exactly what that meant.